The Centre for Policy Studies think tank is putting on a conference in London on Tuesday to address the question, what should the West stand for? And one of the speakers is the former Chief Rabbi, Jonathan Sacks. I asked Lord Sacks for his answer to that question.
Well, I think the fundamental value of the West was human dignity. You know, this idea that every single one of us is in the image and likeness of God. From that, you get Jefferson's Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that the ultimate values are not technological change, are not economic growth, are not global corporations. The ultimate values are, to what extent do we cherish human dignity? To what extent do we make that a criterion in policy making? To what extent do we hold fast to the things that make us human, like the family and communities and things like that? And once in a while we have to remind ourselves of those values.
You're meeting, obviously, in the shadow of the dreadful terrorist attacks of the past few weeks, and I suppose that raises the question whether those have any place in this discussion, or whether, as many people have also said, we should simply treat them as matters of security and matters of mad and dangerous people, rather than issues in which real ideas are engaged.
Well, there are ideas here. I mean, we should not exaggerate this. The level of terror today in the West is tragic, but still low compared to other ages and other places, is important. It's important to keep it in perspective. But the fact is that if we don't know which values we stand for, if we can't articulate them and make them persuasive, then people are going to feel that the West is not offering them a value system, and they will look for other value systems that do not respect democracy and liberty and the sanctity of life. So we shouldn't regard this as completely divorced from a certain loss of confidence and direction in the West.
To what extent does what many people have identified as the rise in populism in the West, here with the Brexit vote, in the United States with Donald Trump, in France until the last election, certainly the rise of the National Front, to what extent do those phenomena fit with your analysis?
Well, when people begin to lose a sense of values, they can easily panic when bad things happen. And when bad things happen, there's an awful tendency to find somebody to blame, and the person you blame is an outsider. It could be the Jews, it could be the Muslims, it could be global capital, it could be anything. And the second that you begin to blame others and you see yourself as a victim, you have rendered yourself effectively powerless, because a victim is not master of his or her own situation. That's when people turn to, inverted commas, strong leaders, and they place their faith in those leaders to get us out of this mess. And that is populism. Populism is always a movement that blames some other party, the elite, the political establishment, or what have you. And when people develop a kind of magical thinking that some great person can save us from all this, they go down a line that ends very dangerously.
Well, that's a very general analysis. Do you see those processes being played out here, for example?
Yes, clearly there is a certain movement of turning inward, which we saw in some British politics and some American politics. I think you see it across Europe, actually. Now, when you're in a global economy, to try and pull up the drawbridge and surround yourself with a moat and high walls, you're actually making the problem much worse. What we need to do is give people the courage and confidence to face a world that is irretrievably global.
Is that what we're doing, drawing up the drawbridge in this country, leaving the European Union?
Well, I think that's what the populist movement is all about. This is some foreigners or some group doing this to us, so let's keep them out, keep ourselves in, and that's the populist movement, and it's a cure that is worse than the disease.
You must, in that case, take a pretty dim view of our political leadership at the moment.
I think political leadership throughout the West is trying to grapple with problems that are very hard to see solutions to, because Our institutions are national, but our problems are global. So there's a mismatch, and it leaves a lot of politicians feeling quite powerless. And when people see political leaders as powerless, they turn to some form of outsider. And that's how populist politics works. And it generally ends in tears.
The other thing that's, of course, attracted enormous amount of attention recently is the dreadful fire in London, which aroused anger as well as bringing people together after it. What do you make of that?
Well, there is anger because, again, we have to remind ourselves the West is about human dignity, and it's about a basic sense of fairness. Now, we've kind of forgotten that, and we've placed our faith in two other institutions, politics and economics. Politics, I've already said, finds it difficult to find solutions to global problems. So the other great god we've worshipped is economics. Now, economics, market economics, is very good at producing wealth, but very bad at distributing it. So a market economy will, over time, generate huge inequalities. And any society where there are huge inequalities, you will find anger because of a deep sense of injustice.
Do you think faith leaders bear some of the responsibility for that, for abandoning the field, if you like, and leaving it to politicians and economists to take over?
Religious leaders are the prophetic counter voice. They should be reminding us that politics and economics aren't all. They're very good at what they do, but they're not the total of what makes a human life, what makes for human happiness and fulfillment. For instance, if our only measure of what we're worth is what we earn or what we own, then a lot of people are going to feel that society regards them as worthless. Now, you can't live with that because that's a betrayal of Western values. So I think we really ought to have been, and ought in the future to be, more prominent voices in the debate, along with anyone who takes non-political and non-economic values as no less important to the human situation.
So just returning finally to the talk on Tuesday, in terms of what the West should stand for, do you think the return of more religious voices, of faith voices, is part of the answer to that question?
Well, one thing we have to do, and that this is at the heart of Western freedom, is never ever to confuse religion with power. Religion is at its best when it seeks influence, not power. It has a voice but not a vote. It should not seek to be politically divisive. It should seek to be socially unifying. And that, I think, is what we should be doing in the future, talking about the values that bind us together as a society, the values we share. And I think there's a great need for it right now, together with the great humanist traditions.
Rabbi Lord Sacks. Time's 29 minutes.